In this video, we're going to be talking about drifting and whether or not it's a good tactic to use to cover ground. Now, this question actually came in from one of our members, George Arndt, and his question was basically that: is drifting a good way to cover ground? And simple answer is yes. It's a very effective way to cover ground and to effectively fish an area, especially if you're in a boat where you don't have a trolling motor or a push pole. Now, when you are drifting, you do want to have some tools with you to help control your drift. Also, there are some things you can do with your vessel to control your drift. So, just to give an example here, I'm going to use this area in North Carolina. This is over by Southport, North Carolina. And we're going to use a creek as an example. So, let's use this creek as an example right here. Let's say you have a north wind and you want to drift this creek to find fish, or a south wind, whichever one. Whichever direction the creek is facing, of course you want to have a wind that is either blowing up or down that creek just to drift it effectively. So let's use a south wind for an example. That way you can start at the entrance to the creek and drift your way in. Now, when you are drifting a creek, if you're drifting too fast, or you could be drifting a flat, if you're drifting too fast, let's say the wind is really pushing you, it's very wise to have a way to stop yourself or slow yourself down. So a drift sock would be ideal if it's just the wind that is pushing you. If it's the current, the drift sock isn't going to work too well. And what I like to do is have an anchor pin or an anchor stick. And these can be used on a boat, especially if you don't have a trolling motor or you don't have a sort of claw anchor or anything like that, which you should have because you're required to on your vessel. But a anchor pin is going to be a much quieter and more efficient way to anchor yourself. So let's just say we're starting at the entrance to this creek here. So you start right here, you're drifting in, you're making some casts, you've got the wind at your back, so you're getting nice long casts, but you get to a spot that you don't want to pass up. So what you would do is just drop the anchor pin into the mud, and that'll stop you. That way you can effectively fish the area instead of just blowing right by it and possibly missing out on some fish catching opportunities. So definitely have some sort of way to stop yourself when you are drifting. Also, when you are drifting an area, a good way to slow yourself down is to turn your vessel to the side. So if you have the wind, let's say the wind is coming at you from the south, what you want to do is face your vessel from east to west. So the side of your vessel is being hit by the wind. That is going to slow down your drift because there's a lot more drag as your vessel's moving through the water. If you're pointed straight down into the wind, that's where your vessel is more suited for moving, so it's going to shoot down a lot quicker than it would if it was positioned to the side. So also, one thing you can do is use the rudder. Use your engine as a rudder. So don't trim it all the way down because you obviously don't want to get stuck in the mud or anything like that, but trim it down just enough so that the skeg of the engine is in the water. That way you can actually turn the wheel and turn your engine, and that will actually turn your boat as you're drifting. So if you want your vessel to go to the side, you can either pick your engine all the way up, or you can just crank the wheel to one side and that will turn the boat and have it facing sideways against the wind. And the same thing can be done in a kayak. If you don't have a rudder on your kayak, you will naturally turn sideways to the wind. If you do have a rudder, what's going to happen is if you have that rudder straight, your vessels or your kayak's eventually going to turn straight down into that wind, and you're going to get taken by that wind really quickly. So it's very ideal to have yourself positioned so you're facing sideways into the wind. So for example, if the wind's coming up, you want to be facing sideways, and that will increase the drag on your vessel. Now, one thing you want to be aware of when you're drifting is if you have to do anything, if you have to retie something or you get distracted by something, make sure you anchor yourself, because next thing you know, you could be pushed up right into the shoreline. Also, you could be pushed up right into a sandbar. So if you do find yourself having to change lures or retie something or get a snack, get a drink, anything that's distracting you from actually drifting, make sure you anchor yourself just for safety. Now, George also had another question which can sort of relate to this, and that was, is trolling or driving a good way to find an active area? So when you are drifting, that's pretty much like trolling. So you're covering a good amount of ground in a short amount of time, so you are more likely to come across an active area the more ground you can cover. If you're just driving around really fast, it can be tough to really pinpoint where good areas are. I find it best, especially since I've been fishing from a kayak, I notice that I slow down and I will thoroughly fish an area, and I'm moving very slowly. So for example, this creek, let's say I was fishing this creek. If I'm fishing from a kayak, I'm pretty much working this entire creek very slowly all the way down, as opposed to being in a boat and driving, where you would probably enter a creek and then drive and drive and drive until you find something that looks good, and you're probably missing opportunities or good areas at fish. So in my opinion, slowing down is definitely a better way to find active areas, because you get a better idea of what's going on instead of just driving right past it. So that will wrap up this video on whether or not drifting is an effective way to cover an area. Again, this is very ideal to do in creeks, but it's also a good way to find fish if you're out there on an open flat or fishing a shoreline. Any type of area you may be fishing, drifting can be a really good way to locate an active area. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Now, if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more in-depth spot breakdowns showing exactly where and how to fish certain areas based on the time of year, tides, weather, and all other sorts of variables that come into play, definitely be sure to check out our Salt Strong Insider Club, where we guarantee you'll start catching more inshore fish in less time. So until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.